Wales is a land of many marvellous, strange and fantastical creatures. Not least of all of them are the Tylwyth Teg, as we know them, the Fae Folk, known by many different names across many different cultures and works of literature, sometimes called elves, fairies, pixies, fae, the fair folk, but we call them the Tylwyth Teg, and this is one of their stories. Now, this story takes place a long time ago, in a time before time, really, not a time of our own, or certainly not a time that anyone alive today would recognise. But it takes place not too far from here, in the small village of Capel Curig, which before it was a bustling hub for tourism and outdoor activities, it was a very simple, humble farming community. But at the top of Capel Curig sits a magical lake called Mymbar, and it was believed by the folk in those days that Mymbar, being a high mountain lake, was a portalway, an access route to the other world, the world under ours that sits beneath us in the metaphysical plane of reality. And to access this only happened at very few times of the year. Three things you needed. You needed a full moon, you needed a clear night sky, and you needed no wind at all, so that there were no ripples on the lake. And when the full light of the full moon would shine upon the lake, it would reflect back from it the mountain of Moel Shabod, which rises above from the lake of Mymbar. And when this reflection was clear on that still night, the portal would open, and the Fae Folk, the Tylwyth Teg, would re-enter our world. It was through this portalway that they left our world many years ago, for there was a time before humans walked the earth that the fairies and the Fae inhabited the world. But as humans ever increased their numbers, the Fae ever retreated back to their other world. And as they did so, it's said, if the legend can be believed, that they left behind, or they forgot in their hurry, their haste, perhaps it was just misfortune, they left behind a beautiful elven necklace made of gold and diamonds and many rare earth metals and minerals, the names of which humans do not know, for humans have never encountered such gemstones under the earth. And it said even that this necklace was made by the dwarves in the elder days as a sign of friendship between the elves and the dwarves when they no longer feuded and warred with one another. Whether we can believe this, who knows? But every now and then, when those three conditions are met, the elves would re-enter the world and search, perhaps in vain, perhaps forlornly, for their long-lost necklace in the hope of bringing it back to their other world. Now, in Capel Curig, there lived a young family, a man, a woman, husband and wife, and they had two children, a 9-year-old daughter called Megan, and a newborn son, only 6 months old, called Merlin. And they were a humble farming family, one of many in the area. But their grandmother, who folks just knew as the old lady, their nine, as we would call a grandmother in Welsh, was a hedge witch. She lived on the outskirts of the village. She kept many potions and herbs and teas and ointments, and while folk in the village were, for the most part, quite scared of her, for it was whispered that she wasn't entirely human herself, that there was a bit of old magic or old something within her. She wasn't fully of this world. They would go to her nonetheless, and she would tell stories, make recipes, heal ailments. She would even help with midwifery and childbirth, for she kept many ancient skills alive and knew many ancient craft. And Old Nine got on very well with Megan. It's said sometimes that magic in families can skip a generation, and Old Nine's son, Malcolm, well, he was just a humble farmer, though there's nothing wrong with that at all. He had a very good life, and perhaps all the better for it. But it skipped him and it went to Megan. And people said that Megan took after Old Nine in many regards, and they would spend much time together discussing stories of old. And Megan's favourite stories were always those of the Tylwyth Teg, the Fae Folk. And because of this, Megan kept the fairies from intervening and troubling the village, because we think of fairies, elves now as these angelic, ethereal beings, and sometimes they were helpful, sometimes they were gallant and brave and noble, sometimes though they were prone to mischief, and if not mischief, malice, and not on a few occasions prone to acts of great evil. For just like humans, they're a complex species. They operate on a wide spectrum of good and bad, depending on your interpretation, and they don't just fit one single stereotype. So in order to keep the fairies from troubling the village on those clear nights of a full moon, when the mountains of Moel Shabod reflected off the lake of Llyn and Mymbar, what Megan would do is she would go to the doorstep of their farmhouse, which was closest to the lake, and she would leave on the doorstep a loaf of freshly baked bread and a jar of milk. And the Tylwyth Teg would happily take this as an offering, as a sign of friendship, and do no mischief on the village. And so it was that every night of a full moon, before she would go to bed, Megan would check her window, look out and look at the sky to see if it was clear, and look at the trees to see if there was rustling, look at the moon to see if it was full, to know if she needed to lay out this offering. It just so happened, though, that summer, on the first full moon of the month of June, when the harvest was due to be reaped, these two things coincided, overlapped. So all that day before the full moon, Megan was out with her mother and her father, and they were taking in the harvest, reaping all the new crops that year, and there was much busy work to be done around the farm and the fields that day. So that come the end of the day, Megan was exhausted, and in her exhaustion, having not just helped on the farm, but also helped put Merlin to bed and told him a bedtime story and got him ready, she was shattered. And as she got into bed, she got very warm and very comfy, and her feet began to warm up, and then she realised, oh no, I've not checked the window. I haven't checked to see, I know the full moon's up, but I haven't checked to see if it's clear or to see if it's windy. Ah well, probably nothing to worry about, thought Megan. It was quite breezy today. I'm sure the breeze will still be going, she thought to herself in vain. And it's just like those times when you get into bed and you get all nice and toasty, and then suddenly you realise you've forgotten to brush your teeth. And then you start to tell yourself stories. Oh, it doesn't matter, I can brush them in the morning. Or, oh, and I'm not even sure where my slippers are. I think I might have left them downstairs, and I don't want to get cold feet as I go to the toilet. And so it was that Megan convinced herself that on this one occasion, having had a busy day, it would be fine not to check the full moon. And she went to sleep soundly that clear, calm, quiet night. And you're probably thinking, how often is it that you get clear, calm, quiet nights in Wales that match those conditions? And nowadays, perhaps seldom, but who knows, I suspect that in those times the world may have been a very different place, and possibly even a more fair and calm place, where clear night skies were not so rare perhaps as they are now. And so morning came, but before Megan was woken up by the cockerels and the sun and all the farm animals making their noises and going about their business, she was woken by something strange that didn't happen before. She was woken by the sound of a crying baby, a crying 6-month-old child. And that's strange because Merlin never cried. Merlin was good as gold. He was very easy to look after, and he got on so well with Megan, and they always played and chatted together. He never cried. But here he was crying before the sun had even risen. So up gets Megan, puts on her clothes, and goes over to the cot, because in those days they shared a bedroom together. But as she approached Merlin in his cot, who was crying incessantly, even though he looked the same, she noticed there was something strange about him, something different. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she just got the sense that something was off with her younger brother. So she takes him downstairs, and he's still crying, and at this point Mum and Dad are up because there's another busy day on the farm, and they're convinced that no, this just happens. As babies get older, they cry. It's just a phase, they say. Don't worry about it. But she plays with him all day, and there's nothing she can do to get him to be better. He won't eat his food, he's spitting out his milk, and every time he tries to drink. He used to love bathing and washing in the tub, but now he hates water, and he screams every time he goes in, and he splashes water all over, and he just becomes a right pain. And Megan's like, this is not my brother. Something is going on here. So she leaves him in his cot, and she makes her way to the one person in the village who might be able to help her, the wise old Nine. Of course, that's who she goes to, because in truth be told, she gets on better with Nine than she does her own parents, and she sees eye to eye with Nine a lot more often than not. They have a lot in common, so it seems. And she knows if anyone has any advice, it will be old Nine. And old Nine sort of, when she hears the story, she grins slyly, says, "Ah, did you by any chance forget last night, Megan, to put out the milk and the loaf of bread that you must always do?" It's like, "No, I didn't, because I thought it was windy in the day, old Nine, and I thought it would be fine." But it wasn't windy during the night, was it? In fact, the wind dropped off as soon as the sun went down, as it often does. And then as the clouds parted, the moon came out, and I watched and I saw the reflection of Moel Shabod off the waters of Llyn and Mymbar, and I saw the Tylwyth Teg come out. So I hope you gave them their bread. If not, they will be the ones behind this mischief. I'm sure of it, says old Nine. In fact, now that I think about it, she says as she scratches her old bony chin, there are stories from other villages, stories I heard in my youth a long, long time ago, that the Tylwyth Teg, if they were angry with you for not leaving them an offering, they might steal a member of your family. And Megan sits there, aghast, a mouth wide open. "Why would they do this, old Nine?" she asks. And old Nine proceeds to explain the history and the predicament of the Fae Folk. She says, "You see, a long, long time ago, the Tylwyth Teg encountered a problem, a fertility problem, a reproduction problem, you could say. As magic began to leave their world, they were no longer able to have babies with one another. And their race began to dwindle and deplete. And it was only through the marriage with humans that they could sustain their race by giving birth to what we call halflings, changelings, Fae Folk, people that were half fairy, half human. You may have met some of these people, Megan, in your life. I know I certainly have met a few of whom I have my suspicions. Sometimes they are great warriors, great athletes, great poets and singers, great artists. Sometimes they are highly charismatic leaders, but sometimes they are very lonely people. Sometimes they always seem like they don't fit in, just as if they were from two worlds, but belong to neither fully, and so they almost drift between the boundaries, invisible sometimes. It's said that sometimes they can make themselves disappear, these changelings, halflings. And so what will happen is the Fae Folk, they will take a human and they will take it down to the other world with them. And over time, that human will grow up and be married to one of the Fae. And if they have babies together, it's said that the old gods will flip a coin, and perhaps that changeling baby will take more after the human. But sometimes it will take more after the Tylwyth Teg. And if it takes more after the Tylwyth Teg, then over time it will remain in their other world and become more Fae. But if it takes more after the human, it begins to not fully agree, not fully settle in the other world, and so it must leave to the human world, and that is where our changeling folk come from. And Megan sits there, eyes aghast to hear that. Next, "Are you telling me that the Tylwyth Teg have stolen my brother? They've taken young Merlin?" "Yes, I'm afraid that is. They must have sensed something special, something queer in Merlin, for they don't just take anyone, but they've taken him as an act of rebellion, as an act of disapproval to see that the village of Capel Curig no longer seeks friendship with the Fae Folk. You must make this right, Megan." How can I do this?" she says to old Nine. "Well, you must get this new baby who is not your brother. He is a replacement, probably a Fae Folk in disguise, I would imagine. You must get him to admit that he is not your brother and that he is a Fae." "But how will I do this? asks Megan, for he never talks, he just screams and shouts and throws his toys out the pram and spits his food out and splashes water. I don't know, says old Nine. That, Megan, is for you to go and figure out. And with that, Megan goes out and she leaves the house, and she's so angry that she decides she's going to walk straight to Llyn and Mymbar and shout at the lake until the Fae come out, and then she'll explain to them what's happened. So she walks to the lake, but the wind has picked up again that day, and she can see waves flowing across the lake. And she shouts, but there's no reflection, and the sound just bounces off the lake back to her. And if the Fae Folk could even have heard her that day, no doubt they would have ignored her. And she sits down in exasperation on the lake, and she looks up at the mountain of Moel Siabod, and there she sees a lone tree growing on a high-up crag with sharp, serrated green leaves. It's a thin, spindly tree growing over a fast-flowing stream. And she sees the red berries on the tree that the birds are nibbling at. She goes, ah, rowan berries. And she knows a lot about rowan because often in the summer, her and old Nine would take the berries, harvest them from the rowan trees, and use them to make all sorts, like jams and jellies, which you can still do to this day if you process the berries correctly. And she knew a lot about rowan, also about the magic properties of it. She knew that you could make crosses out of rowan and other such symbols that would ward off fairies from doorsteps, because it's said that Fae women, the Fae Folk, the female Fae Folk, didn't like rowan wood. And it's also said that the Fae men didn't like rowan berries. So that gave her a brilliant idea. So she begins to climb her way up the slopes of Moel Siabod until she gets to the stream on which the other side of is the rowan tree. But the stream is flowing quite fastly. So she tries to jump over it, but the first time she doesn't quite get the jump right. She lands a bit short. She lands in the water and she gets rushed downstream, and just in a split second she's gone 10 meters down, and she manages to climb out, but on the same side of the bank she was already on. Second time, she clambers her way back up. She's wet now, but she's determined to get across. So she jumps over, and this time she makes it across, but she slips in the mud on the other side, falls back in the stream, and then straight again 10 meters downstream until the river ceases its flowing as quickly, and she's able to climb back out, but again on the same side she started on. So this time she has a different idea. She's going to try and jump higher and catch onto a branch of the rowan tree and swing herself across. A good idea, she thinks. So she clambers up again the side of the bank. She's very wet now, very cold, and with a huge leap she jumps up, grabs a rowan branch, but as you know, with rowan trees, they're quite thin, spindly, delicate little trees, and as she grabs the branch, it instantly snaps off, and she holds onto it as she falls into the water, and again she goes down that 10-meter water slide to where it flattens out and pools, and she climbs back out the same side of the bank, failed 3 times, until she looks in her hand, holding the branch that she had grabbed onto and snapped off in her fall. And she looks at the end of it and she sees a huge bushel of great red rowan berries. A gift, she thinks. Something or someone must have been watching over her and helping her that day. And with that branch, she goes back down to old Nine's house, and together they process the berries and they make a lovely porridge. And she takes it back down to her home. It's got a big old saucepan full. And she lays it on the table, and oh, it smells so sweet because they put a lot of sugar in and other rich herbs that old Nine had. And the baby, pretending to be her brother Merlin, looks at the porridge and of course turns his nose up at it because he hasn't been eating any food, he's just been spitting everything out. But Megan tries a bit of reverse psychology on Merlin. She says, no, baby Merlin, this isn't for you. This is for all the hungry farmers. You must not touch this porridge. And Merlin spits out his dummy, starts crying, and she leaves the house. And she goes and she collects all the farmers who were busy in the field harvesting. and she tells them the plan. She says, whatever you do, when you have this porridge, even if you don't like it, one by one you must all compliment it and say how lovely and delicious it is. So the plan is hatched. One by one, the farmers go in to the farmhouse where Megan has the porridge, and she serves them all a bowl of this rowan berry porridge. And they all say, oh, Megan, that is delicious. What fantastic porridge. I've never had anything so sweet. And one by one, they take their bowl, finish it, leave, until there's only a small little bit at the end. And she didn't notice, as curiously, that baby Merlin has, for the first time, stopped crying, and he's looking at the porridge with envy, eyes wide open with jealousy, and his tummy begins to rumble, and he holds out his small baby hand and goes, ah, 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 gesturing at the porridge as if he wants some. And Megan says, well, okay, I suppose because there is a little bit at the end, and because you've been good and stopped crying, I'll give you a little bit. So she gives him a little spoon, takes it to his mouth, and he swallows it down. And to begin with, he thinks, delicious, and he licks his lips and he smiles and giggles like a baby. But then he begins to splutter a bit. He begins to seem to change colour. His pink cheeks, they start to go a bit bluey green. And then he throws up everywhere and he starts crying. Oh, and then he starts to go a bit purpley, as if he's choking, and he chokes and he's spitting everything out. And Megan looks at this baby, grins a sly grin, shows no sympathy whatsoever. What's the matter, young brother? Why don't you like this porridge? You love this porridge. You love it, especially when I put rowan berries in it, don't you, baby? And with that, the bluff is over. The Fae Folk, disguised as a baby, coughs out the last bit and begins to speak in a human voice that he was disguising and hiding the whole time. You put rowan in this porridge? Rowan berries? You know we're allergic to rowan berries. Why would you do this? You're going to kill me. No, I don't think so. I think my old nine has a remedy for rowan berry poisoning. We could take you there straight away. Of course, you would have to admit who you are, wouldn't you? Because you're speaking. So tell me, who are you really? Tell me your disguise, tell me your secret, and I shall take you to her. Very well, very well. My name is Avari. I am one of the Fae Folk, and I am in disguise as your brother. We kidnapped him because you didn't leave us any milk and bread, as you always do. And we took this as a slight on our friendship, our pact and our agreement. So we took your brother, and when he grows up, because he is powerful and wise, so we have foreseen, we'll marry him off to one of our Fae Folk women, and they'll have lots of elf babies together. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we are going to take you back. That is, if you want to get the healing herbs from Old Nine, we're going to take you to her, and then in return, you are going to bring my baby back from Llyn and Mymbar. You're going to bring back my baby brother, Merlin. Do we have a deal, Avari? Very well, says the elf. And with that, he turns back into his elf form, his Fae Folk form, and they go to the edge of the village where Old Nine lived in her hedge witch cottage. And the deal is struck, the bargain is made, and the elf, if he had any ideas of going back on his deal, those ideas quickly vanished when he saw Old Nine, for perhaps he recognised something strange and queer in Old Nine, something ancient that some of the other people of the village knew. And they gave him his remedy, and the colour returned to his skin, and he ceased his choking. He said, very well. And with that, he clicks both his fingers, he evaporates back into nothing, and on the floor there is Megan's young 6-month-old baby brother, Merlin, just as he was before, giggly, smiley, and happy. But there was something different about Merlin now. It was the same baby. No change had happened in him physically, but both Old Nine and Megan sensed in that moment that he had undergone some form of metamorphosis, some form of change in evolution. For time works very differently in the other world. Sometimes it can go by very, very quickly. Sometimes it can go by very, very slowly, a bit like Narnia. Sometimes you can be there for what seems like years and you return and it's only been a couple of days, and sometimes vice versa. So there was no way of knowing how long Merlin had been down there in the other world, or what he'd seen, what he'd learned, who he'd spent time with, what sort of changes he had undergone, but he had certainly undergone something. And from that day onwards, life for Megan and Merlin was going to be very, very interesting, very, very different. Mae Govanen, Diolch yn fawr, thank you for listening to that short story of the Tylwyth Teg and Capel Curig, and perhaps the origins of, you may have guessed it, the great mighty Druid himself, Merlin, and his sister Megan, who perhaps you don't know much about, but together these two will go on many more adventures and journeys here at Cechlir Wedlau, the Grove of Stories. So if you've watched to the end, thank you very much. If you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the weekly updates to all these stories and adventures. And if you are returning again, thank you for your continued support. It means a great deal. So, Diolch yn fawr, and as always, I will see you in the next story.